Okay, welcome back. After a lengthy vacation, this is video 18 of how to use music theory to play any song, and the song we've chosen to learn is She Loves You by the Beatles. We're up to the point of trying to figure out the melody of the song. And figuring out the melody of the song is intuitive for many people, but there is an underlying music theory reason for it. And I'm going to go into that. And it turns out that the key to figuring out the melody to a song is to figure out what key the song was written in. So the key is the key. I think a lot of non-musicians have heard that term a lot, what key is it in? And they think it's probably some magical thing that they'll never understand. But it's really not that difficult. I just want to clear up one point that might be a little confusing, and that is there is the key signature that the song is written in, and then there's the key that the song is in. And since we're assuming that you do not have the sheet music for the song and you don't even know how to read sheet music, although you can to watch these videos, but I'm assuming you don't know how, we're not going to talk a lot, at least at this point, about the key signature. We might get to that later. But the key signature is a notational way of indicating which keys are sharped or flatted. And that is something, the key signature, you can determine just by looking at the sheet music. If you have the sheet music, you can look at it and you'll get the key signature, and oftentimes it is the key of the song because there's clearly a direct relationship there. But it's not always true, because there's something called a relative minor key that a song could be written in. The relative minor key has the same key signature as the major. And so just by looking at the music, you can't tell just by the key signature that the song was written in, say, key of C, which has no sharps or flats, or the key of A minor, which also has no sharps or flats, and therefore is the relative minor key to C major. And this is true of all the keys. So, for example, if we were talking about the key of G major, well, that key signature will have a sharp on F, and it will look exactly like the key signature for the related key E minor, which has one sharp on F too. And that's just one of the many oddities or quirks of music theory in the notational sense, the way you write things down. So we're not talking about key signature, we're talking about key. So what is the key? When a musician says, what key do you want to start in or do you want to play in? They're asking you, or they're talking about the tonal center of the song. What pitch or tone does the song start on? Really, if you boil it down to what it really means in practical terms, the key of a song is usually the first chord of the first verse. So if you and I were to sit down and play a song together, maybe I'm playing the piano and you're singing or playing guitar or something, and we want to be together on it on the same page, we want to sound right, I'll say, hey, let's play this song, She Loves You by the Beatles, and I'll say, let's do it in G. And what I mean by that is the first chord of the first verse that I play will be G, and you need to do the same thing. That doesn't mean you'll necessarily start on the note G, but it means the chord, the underlying chord behind the melody will be G. And notice I said the first chord of the first verse, not the introduction. Introductions are almost always in some other key center, or I don't know if almost always is fair, but often in some other key center or tonal center. And they're done usually, or sometimes it's a related minor to kind of get you in the mood, or sometimes it's a step away or something. So don't look at the introduction when you're trying to figure out the key to a song. We'll look at the first chord of the first verse. We need to figure out what that is, and usually if we can look at that chord, there's a good chance that the song is written in that. But figuring out the key to a song is a little bit subjective, and it's not as simple as it's always the first chord of the first verse. It's a little bit like in medicine where you're trying to diagnose somebody for something difficult like lupus, and there's not just one test you can do and say, oh, he's got lupus. There are many tests that they do, and ultimately after looking at several factors, they decide, okay, yeah, we've got enough of these together. We're going to say you have lupus. You fit the diagnoses, so we're going to do this to you. Figuring out the key is a little bit like that, because we're going to look at several factors to determine the key. Some of them might seem a little subjective to you, and I guess that's just the nature of music. Music is very interesting because of that, because it combines very objective rules with some very subjective and creative aspects, and that's why I like it so much, but that's probably why you like it too. Anyway, so because this video is going to get into figuring out the key of any song, it might be a little long, and I'll probably have to break it up into a few parts because I don't want to lose you, so I'm going to go slowly. And we're going to start with figuring out, in order to figure out the melody, we're going to figure out what key is the song She Loves You in. Okay, so now we're looking at the chord sheet for She Loves You, which I went over earlier how I got this and made it. And I've drawn a big fancy orange and red arrow at the first chord on the first verse. And that first chord is G. And notice that we do not look at the intro, because that's not necessarily going to give us the key. We want to look at the first chord in the first verse, and the verse is where the story of the lyrics begin. And again, you can see that it starts on a G chord. Now we're looking at the last chord of the song. In this case, the last part of the song is an ending, sometimes called an outro, to distinguish it from an intro, or it could be called a coda or a tag. But anyway, you can see I put that fancy arrow now by the last chord, and it's a G major 6. The G6 indicates G major 6. So now we've looked at the first chord of the first verse and found it was a G, and the last chord of the song, and it's also a G. So those are two indications that this song may be in the key of G major. Okay, so far in trying to figure out the key to this song, we've looked at the first chord of the first verse, and we saw that from our chord sheet that that was a G. And then we looked at the last chord of the song, and we saw it was a G major 6, which is also a G. So all signs are pointing to G at this point, that the key of the song is probably in G. So now what we want to do is try to confirm that or not at the piano. And the thing that we'll do is we'll take a G scale, a G major scale, and we'll play it, and we'll compare it to the melody from the verse of the song. This is all trying to figure out what the key of the song is, or the tonal center. And in this case, we're thinking that it's probably a G major, so we need to figure out the G major scale. So on the piano, we start at G, and we play that pattern of steps that we learned way back in the videos of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So a G major scale would be... So on a G major scale, there'd be 1 sharp on F to get that last sound that we want, where it goes, and everything else is a white note. So starting on G, running up to G. So we need to compare that G major scale with the melody of the verse. So I've queued up just the first verse of the song from the Beatles' original recording. I'm just going to play a little bit of it here so we can hear it, and then I'll pick it out on the piano and compare it to a G major scale. So here's the song. Here's the G major scale. Here's the melody to the song. The pickup note is down here. And then it goes. Every one of those notes is from the G major scale, and at first it's just walking up the scale. Watch. The only note missing is the... So hopefully you can see that by comparing this G major scale to the melody of the verse She Loves You, that they're the same. So that is yet another indication that this song is written in G. So at this point, everything is pointing to G major. Now there's another thing you can do that's very useful to know how to do when you're figuring out songs and melodies, and that is to figure out the diatonic chords that go with the scale in question. And all that sounds complicated, but it's really not. Diatonic chords, the word diatonic it's Latin for dia means across or through, tonic is the tone. So what it means is across the tones of the scale. So play chords, diatonic chords, that are made up from the scalar notes, in this case of G major. So if we play a 3-note chord, what's also known as a triad, on every note of the G major scale, but play those 3 notes chords only from the G major scale, then we'll have played the diatonic chords. And then if we compare those diatonic chords of G major to the chords that are actually used in the song from our chord sheet, and we find that they're basically the same, then we can pretty much conclude the song is in G major. And in fact, that's the case here. In the next part of the video, I'll show you how to figure out what the diatonic chords are for any scale, and in particular we'll do it for G major and compare it to the chords in She Loves You. So for now, the key to figuring out the melody of a song is to figure out what key the song is written in. And the key to that is to take a look at the first chord in the first verse, the last chord of the song, and that's not always going to give it to you because maybe the song went through some modulation or transposition or something. So the last chord maybe of the song will be in a completely different key than what the song started out in. But if you listen carefully, you can hear where the modulation starts, and then you can just pick up the last chord before the modulation or the key change. Then you can play a scale of the key that you think it's in this case G, and see how that compares to the melody. It's not always going to be the case that the melody is the scale. That just so happened this time. But what should happen is that the scale that you've picked should sound good with the first verse. That shouldn't be like fingernails on a chalkboard. And then the last thing that you can do to confirm that you're in the right key is to check the diatonic chords available to you in that key and see if they match up with the chords that are on your chord sheet. And like I said at the beginning of this video, if everything lines up and points in one direction, then that's probably the key of the song, and you can go with that in trying to figure out the melody. So in the next video, again, we'll go through the diatonic chords, and then we'll go back and try to figure out the remainder of the song. Since we've already figured out the verse, we only need to figure out the refrain part and then put it together to have the melody.